Good evening. I, Nisha Nair, Assistant Professor and Assistant Dean, Academic Affairs at Jindal Global Law School, on behalf of the Gender Studies Group at OP Jindal Global University, extend a warm welcome to all of you to today's talk on the theme of working women in the times of pandemic and access to justice. It is my honor and privilege to introduce the guest speaker for the evening, Justice Moushumi Bhattacharya. Justice Bhattacharya is a permanent judge of the Calcutta High Court. She practiced extensively at the high courts around the country as well as the Supreme Court before being elevated to the bench in 2017. Her primary areas of practice were civil, company, arbitration, and constitutional matters with a specialization in corporate and intellectual property law matters. Justice Bhattacharya has taken a keen interest in issues pertaining to gender and minority and firmly believes in taking actions for the upliftment of the disadvantaged. She has been a part of discussions on gender discrimination and social issues with many academic groups. Justice Bhattacharya has conducted several webinars and talks on topics including domestic violence, civil law, intellectual property rights, arbitration, and mediation, as well as personal laws. She has conducted courses at judicial academies, including the National Judicial Academy. Most recently, she was invited to conduct a seminar on divorce laws in India at the State Judicial Academy of West Bengal. Thank you, Justice Bhattacharya, for accepting our invitation and welcome to JGU. In today's talk, Justice Bhattacharya will be focusing on the experience of women professionals from the bar, bench, and higher judiciary, including working women in different sectors such as domestic help, small business owners, teachers, and doctors. In the context of access to justice, the focus will again be on the experience of women professionals based on personal anecdotes with a special emphasis on the impact of pandemic on women's status, particularly on how the pandemic has affected the women in terms of accessing justice. The talk will be followed by an interactive Q&A session with the members of the audience. I now invite Justice Moushumi Bhattacharya to deliver the talk.
Thank you, Professor Nair, for this engaging opportunity to talk about something which is close to my heart. And a very good evening to all of you to actually take the time out for an evening out of your festive celebratory season, I suppose. So let me just quickly go to the topic which I am to address, that is working women in the times of pandemic and access to justice. Even a cursory glance at the topic would make it clear that there are actually quite a few parts to the topic. First, it's working women. Then it's working women in the times of pandemic. And then it's access to justice. So I can clearly see 4 parts to the topic, but I shall try to keep it as crisp and as to the point and as interesting as possible. Before I tell you what I propose to do with the topic and how I propose to deal with it, the request made to me was that I should talk a little bit about the judicial appointments or the representation of women in the higher judiciary, which is the high courts and the Supreme Court, and also dwell a bit on some of the cultural icons with regard to women's rights, including, and the names were actually suggested to me, of course, Justice Ginsburg, Ruth Bader, and Justice Leela Seth, because of their particular place in the cultural iconography, if I can use that term, vis-a-vis women's rights and a lot of cultural freedoms when we think about them in a certain context, I would add. And I was also asked to make the talk easy breezy, anecdotal, without too much research and facts and case laws, which actually made it, quite interesting for me, a departure from most of the other talks which I have done so far. And I actually was looking forward to the talk. So, good evening, and you will allow me, if I kind of shift my gaze from the screen to the notes which I have prepared, because I just need to turn a few pages. If not back in history, then at least, in the present times, but going to and fro, turning the clock back sometimes. Um, so what about the structure of the talk? Let me just quickly tell you how I propose to structure the talk, so it's just easier to kind of, more engaging for the listener. I have really thought about the topic, and what I want to do really is, when we talk of working women, the presumption is, in most cases, um, is of working women of a certain, within a certain bracket. And when we say working women, we immediately think of or visualize women in the corporate sector, or at least where you are concerned, women in litigation, in law firms, women, in the judiciary, etc. What I really wanted to do is, really broaden the gaze a little bit, and include women who are really the invisible heroes, if I may use a gender neutral term in that sense, the invisible workers who have just very recently, and I would say as recently as 2011, been spoken of and been thought about as being, for being brought under a certain protective umbrella, whether it is the laws, whether it is government advisories. And when I talk of these women, I want you to look at women who really at all levels make our lives comfortable. I want you to think of the women who work, in the airlines, in the hospitality industry, women who are the masseurs. They go from door to door, or they have their own business, just to kind of extend their personal niche services. I'm thinking of domestic workers. Um, I'm thinking of sex workers, a particular thought on sex workers, because they really have been probably the worst hit by the pandemic, the lack of social contacts, etc., and so on and so forth. And I would like to look at the laws, or whether really there are any laws which give them that protective bulwark, to give them that access to justice if they at all want to go to the courts. Because the interesting thing is that, and allow me, I'll be going, all over the place, because I think that's one of the hallmarks of an easy, free flow exchange of ideas. And this is by no means an instruction. It is just, some thoughts which I want to place to you, and some articles I've read, and I really would love to thank Sonal and Sagar, both students of Jindal Global, and my law clerk Shivangi, for their invaluable help in putting all the material across to me. So I would just like to share some data and some of the thoughts which have gone into, which have been taken by the government to give some sort of a protection to the largely unorganized sector of women workers. So without any further introduction, I will immediately go to the first, some of the the broader overview of certain articles which I have read. And one of the first articles which really, I thought was extremely relevant was an article circulated by the Gates Foundation. All of you know that the Gates Foundation does a lot of work, irrespective of country and geographical zones. So some of the stories and some of the facts which I came across. And the article started with this small little geographical place called Hawassa, which is in the southern part of Ethiopia, and which kind of focused on women who actually about 30,000 workers, women workers, mostly from the rural and unorganized sectors who had no kind of job certainties, because they wanted to change their calling in life, because they wanted to do something different. They actually migrated and they made a conscious choice for these job sewing factories. That's how they are described in Hawassa. And this was before the pandemic struck. So this was, I'm talking in terms of sometime in 2019, 2018, 2019. And after the COVID struck, and these women were largely happy before March, and they were in these factories and they were working. They had if not a well-paying job, at least a job with a certain amount of money at the end of each month. And after the pandemic struck, which is after March, April, or perhaps even earlier, I read that half of these women were put on leave. And why were they put on leave? Not the pandemic immediately. I mean, that was not the immediate cause. But because half a world away, remember this is southern Ethiopia, the government orders which these factories were getting, they suddenly stopped. And why did they suddenly stop? Because somewhere in New Jersey, a lot of colleges closed, prom parties were cancelled, graduate events were cancelled. So all the orders for dresses and fancy clothes, everything, that stopped. And because of these cancellation of the prom parties in anticipation of a long-term lockdown, closure, whatever, the garment factory actually laid off half of the women even before March, mind you. And actually, I was thinking of this Catherine McKinnon. She spoke about the butterfly effect. So if something happens, the flapping of the wings of the butterfly reaches a remote part of the world, and there is, I mean, one would not even see a proximate cause and effect to that event. But this is how it happened in southern Hawassa. And while most of the women lost their jobs, the hardest hit were women who had migrated from their respective rural areas to these garment sewing shops, because they had to go back. They did not have the money to take them back to their villages. You see these parallel mirror images all over in our country. I don't have to tell you what we saw on our television screens since March this year, since April this year. And the data says that 1.8 times women were more likely, 1.8 times of jobs for women were more likely to be cut in any economic recession in the world. I'm talking about the Gates Foundation article. And the other terrible disadvantages faced by the unorganized women workers, or at least in the unorganized sector, are not really difficult to find. B, they have much fewer plan Bs. I mean, if they lose their jobs, the mobility from one job to the other is zero in most cases. In Hawassa, it was found that after these 50% women were laid off, even before the pandemic, very few women actually landed up a second job. So they remain jobless as we speak. And women's jobs, especially those in the informal sector, have far fewer institutional buffers, in terms of health risk, safety risk, market risks, any kind of access to social security, any benefits, everything. I mean, they're deprived of. And in India, we come to India from Ethiopia, 94% of female workers operate in the unorganized sector, which is really the worst hit by the pandemic. And women have much less access, if not zero access, to credit facilities. And there is actually a well documented profitability gap between the work performed by the men and women. And in Ghana, for example, women have, apart from, I really don't want to go on focusing on Africa, but and areas surrounding it, but women really have actually uh, such few options, such few employment options, that there's a conscious pushing of these women to what we call as like a very small set industry, like industries like salons, uh, like industries which cater exclusively to women, and which actually makes them shifts them to the borderline of the revenue advantage. Because if you are concentrating these women to very small industries, then if these industries close down, as a lot of salons and all that have closed down in our own country because of the pandemic, the chances of these women finding an alternative job is absolutely, it's nil, zero. And the other effect which I was thinking of is that, if you're thinking about a ladder of opportunity, a ladder of employment, a ladder of jobs, then you will find that as women get displaced from their jobs in the upper rungs of the ladder, they continue to push women in the lower rungs of the ladder out of their space, if you know what I mean. So the push is down. And what happens is, the resulting, it's actually it's well documented in some of the economic books. What actually happens is that the most disadvantaged women, in terms of opportunity, in terms of pay scales, they actually, obviously are the worst hit, because they get totally displaced out of whatever they were doing, because there's, the pressure comes from up. And there was an economic survey in the World Bank in uh, July of this year, which says that 57% of women were laid off in June. And even though in most of the countries they made 42% of the workforce. So can you compare the statistics there? Unbelievable, really. And it also talks about outbreaks of various diseases, particularly in the developing countries and the less developed countries, where women's economic security suffers the most. In fact, in 2014, when the Ebola broke out in Liberia and a lot of other countries, surrounding countries, the unemployment rate in women, it was three times more than that of men. And even though the men recovered from their economic state, it took them 8 months. For women, it took them more than 4 years to get back their jobs, to get back a certain amount of security. So this is the comparative uh, state of men and women. And if I come next to my second topic, that is the women who we see around us, the litigation lawyers, the women in the corporate worlds. I will quickly go to a data which I thought was quite useful for me, and it was eye-opening for me. Is that several of the existing laws, like, for example, the Minimum Wages Act 1948, the Unorganized Workers Social Security Act 2008, then the National Policy on Domestic Worker, etc., which is, by the way, at a formulation stage, actually provide little or no relief to women workers. And the national the NJDG, that's a National Judicial Data Grid, which is now the Supreme Court under Justice Chandrachud. It kind of brings you all the data which with regard to women. I will just quickly give you the data. for district and taluka courts, the statistics show that that statistics put out by the NJDG, that's the National Judicial Data Grid, that out of about 3 crore cases, only 29 lakhs are filed by women. That's the district courts. And the high courts actually fare much poorer in comparison. In the high courts, out of 42 lakh cases, 42 lakh 69,000 approximate cases, only 77,000 cases are filed by women, which makes it 1.8% of the litigants across the country, all high courts. And there are some, the NJDG has published some data as of March, 8th of March of this year. Data concerning Rajasthan, Allahabad, Kerala, Patna, Gujarat high courts, which say that actually Rajasthan has the highest percentage, which is 19.99% of the total cases which have been filed by women, and out of which civil cases constitute about 8,000, followed by writs, which is about 4,000, and last criminal cases. And after Rajasthan, the next, best state scenario is Allahabad, followed by Kerala, Patna, and Gujarat. And with regard to women in the Indian courts, there's another Women in Indian Courts, which is a study of women legal professionals. The comparative data from 1962 to 2005 shows that there has been an increase from 3.12 to 5.08% of women practitioners, actually women who are practicing in the courts. And now there are a total number of registered practitioners. This is 2005, so a little bit dated, but just to give you the jump in the figures, is from 136,635 to 228,144. So out of the total number of 228 lakhs, about only 11 lakhs are women practicing in the courts all across the country. So if I just come back to the domestic workers discussion, which I wanted to do really, and there's a lot of writing on domestic workers. I'll just bring you snippets of it. Just give me a moment. Yes. So in India now, there are more than 50 lakh domestic workers, out of which 80% are women. And the incredible part is that there is no affirmed, believable, or data which documents the number of women, the kind of work they do, their pay scales. There is no documented data which you can find or which you can access if you want to. I wanted to know that I wanted to access the data. And in 2010, there was a draft for Domestic Workers Welfare and Social Security Act, but nothing came out of it in 2010. And in 2011, just to give you a quick brief on whatever's been done and whatever, the important dates to know. In 2011, the International Labour Organization, ILO, adopted the Convention 189 to ensure that dignity and legal protection is given to the workforce, including health insurance, minimum wages, and also an attempt to bring women workers under a protective umbrella of the existing legal framework. And in our country, the government brought about the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, which is a health insurance scheme. But the 30,000 cover, the rupees 30,000 cover, was only meant for the registered domestic workers. So you can imagine that, I mean, the majority of women workers were left out from this Yojana. And even if you think of very popular for example, the Sexual Harassment of Women at the Workplace Act of 2013, you will find that even the Vishakha judgment, for example, you will find that only some women at some stage of empowerment, if I can use that term, actually have access to courts, actually bring their complaints to courts, or they have a forum to air their grievances. But the large part of the unorganized sector, people who work for us at our homes, we see them every time, every day, they are completely left out from whatever protection is given to the workers. And the laws which really need a review and a revamping in this context with regard to giving protection to the workers, I'll just mention very few of them. The Minimum Wages Act 1948, all of you know that thanks to sections 2 and 3 of the act, and the term scheduled employment coming in at every other provision of the act, the unorganized sector, the domestic workers, are not covered by the 1948 Act because of definitional constraints. The Maternity Benefit Act of 1961, Workmen's Compensations Act of 1923, Payment of Wages Act. I mean, these are some of the acts. Equal Remuneration Act of 1976, which are some of the acts which really need a relook when it comes to giving protection to the workers. I keep repeating, who don't have access to courts, who don't have the necessary infrastructure or the training or the education or the background giving them a sense of confidence to go to courts. And that is the sector we need to really focus on. I mean, without drawing brackets and creating buckets of entitlements, that is really the sector we need to look at. I must mention that in August 2016, I mean, these are some of the highlights, some of the brightest spots of the discussion. The Domestic Workers Welfare Bill, which is a 2016, was contemplated, and it was drafted, in which domestic work was defined as work performed in or for a private household. There's a reason why I'm reading this out, the definition clause out. Work performed in or for a private household includes cooking, cleaning, housekeeping, driving, gardening, childcare, old age care, but does not include work related to businesses run from private households. So why did I read out this definition clause? It's an improvement, a definite improvement in a sense, because a household for the first time probably was specified as a workplace, and it was not treated as opposed to treating a household as a private space. So therefore this was a significant step, hopefully in the right direction, that even though it is within the four corners of a house, you treat that work as a workplace, and therefore the other benefits should follow. The 2016 bill also, of course, talks of the migrant workers, in which domestic worker has been defined as a person employed to do domestic work for remuneration, whether for cash or kind, for one or more employees by staying at the household premises, and includes casual, temporary, contractual workers. Migrant workers, the pandemic is one of the eye openers by way of migrant workers, and we've all seen the plight which they've gone through, and it has also attempted to give an enhanced definition to the concept of wages. I'm talking about the 2016 bill, by saying that all remuneration expressed in terms of money, but does not include rent, supply of light, water, medical attendance, etc. So this really kind of, it's an important step, provided something comes out of it at the end. That, I mean, if I'm, as an employer, if I'm giving my domestic help, my maid, benefits of essential services, then I cannot take that to be factored in to her or his monthly salary. So, which is important. And the good part of this draft, which I thought was important, is the contract resolution. And what is that? That is, within 2 months of employment of domestic work, employment an employment agreement will have to be registered and verified by any social urban organized body. And I cannot possibly stress how important this is, because if you remember, because these workers, they do not have the protection of the laws, and why do I say that? Section 14 1C of the Specific Relief Act, contracts which are not specifically enforceable, and 14.1C is contracts of personal service, notorious. You know that there are certain these contracts, a plethora of cases where courts have refused to, for good reason, because there is a statute in place there, refused to enforce contracts of personal service. And read with Section 41E of the Specific Relief Act, which actually digs the nail even more against the domestic workers, is that 41E injunctions cannot be granted to prevent breach of contract, the performance of which cannot be specifically enforced. So where does this leave? Where does the position of law leave the domestic workers? To put it succinctly, if a termination is rightful, then of course they can't, no ground to go to the court. If the termination is wrongful, the only benefit, the only remedy they have is for a claim for damages, at best. So the bottom line is that even if a termination is wrongful, the termination survives. So the employment goes, the job goes. The only remedy is, and if the termination is wrongful, they just have to go to the court and ask for damages. The only way out is that if it is a public employment, Article 311 of the Constitution, there are a whole lot of cases in that where they can go to a court, file a writ. But this is the theoretical part. In reality, you will, how many of us have really found workers, not only domestic workers, women who are in the, in the unorganized sectors, salons, airlines, even to a certain extent, how many of us have really seen these women go to the courts and file a suit saying that, okay, I have lost my job, but I need to be paid. I need to be paid my salary, or I need to be given at least 3 more months of salary. How many of us have really found that? Absolutely, absolutely no cases. You can blame it on a total lack of education, a lack of infrastructure, a lack of exposure. All these lack of a confidence building measure. They wouldn't even know who to go to talk to. They wouldn't even know the existence of a legal aid society. They wouldn't even know that there are certain contact persons in courts who may be proactive. There is a concept of a pro bono work. They wouldn't even have that knowledge. So who did they go to? Can you imagine their plight? And plus, even if a woman does go to court, I was just thinking, the contract is never a written contract when you employ somebody in your house. So for that person to prove the terms of a contract, no, zero. The best case possible is for that person to get witnesses who would come and testify before a judge and say that, yes, he or she did so many hours of work and was not paid. That is something which I hope to see in the near future, but unfortunately have not seen till now. This total pressure of going to the courts. So that's the reality as it stands. So If I go to the next topic, which is sex workers, and I really topic close to my heart, and easily the most affected by the pandemic, thanks to social distancing, physical distancing, whatever terms you use, the worst hit by the pandemic. And there was a very bold judgment by a single judge of the Bombay High Court recently, which says that it cannot be a prostitute, a sex worker cannot be seen as a criminal offender, but it's really a matter of choice. And there was a division bench of the Calcutta High Court which also said that they should be treated as victims of victims of crime instead of looking at them as sexual offenders. Bold, progressive judgments, but really, I mean, not too many of such kind. And when it comes to sexual workers, I will quickly give you some data, not too much. Yes. In fact, the Supreme Court also, when we are talking of progressive judgments, the Supreme Court in a recent, I think sometime in September of this year, gave an order that sex workers should be provided dry rations, masks, soaps, very sensitive judgment focusing on a segment which really bore the brunt of the pandemic. And in India, I read that 96% of sex workers lost their earnings from April onwards. And 71% of these workers don't have or could not move to any other alternative livelihood, or to, when we talk of social mobility, there is also lateral mobility. So they actually lost their jobs and they remained that way. So there was no succor, no economic succor for them. And 33%, as we speak, do not have enough for even 2 to 3 meals a day. So can you imagine a pandemic? We don't know when this state of affairs is going to end. In April, we thought it's only for 2 to 3 months at best. Now we know that it is going to last at least till the third quarter of 21. And for these women, I mean, we are at least privileged. We come from certain backgrounds. I'm talking to people who are having the best of education. But can you think of our counterparts, women, after all? I mean, what they are going through. And the study says that 60% of the sex workers in Delhi, MG Road, I'm told, they returned to their villages because they waited for 3 to 4 months and they realized that there's absolutely no other way, and they returned to their villages. And the ones who stayed back, mostly in urban areas, now they have switched over to technology, mostly to Zoom and other, all the other platforms, to continue with their work, continue with their jobs. And can you imagine how, even though it sounds empowering that they have shifted to virtual platforms in order to continue their work, can you imagine how difficult it is for them to get insured payment? I mean, once a customer comes to them for, and they for their services, they can at least, the middlemen, popularly termed as pimps, they at least serve an important function there because they ensure that the women get paid. And now on the virtual platform, with the women not even having most of them bank accounts, the chances of their getting paid for for however much of the work they are doing, even that is not assured. And Delhi's GB Road is one of the brightest spots of the survey, where it says that vocational training, and they have started making earthen clay lamps, diyas, particularly for the festive season. More than 200 women have registered for vocational training. and 20% of 2,000 sex workers in Delhi's GB Road left for home. I told you that there's a very substantial percentage left for home, and 60%. And I also read about one very enterprising sub inspector of police, Miss Kiran Sethi, who is doing wonderful work in integrating these women and helping them to get alternative jobs. I'm sure there are thousands of Kiran Sethis all over the country, and I hope they thrive. And actually, we can also do our bit in seeing what to do about the sex workers. If I can um, just give you some more statistics, very brief, but I just thought it's important. Is Yes, um, there was a going back to domestic workers, but still in the unorganized sector. There was a draft of national policy for domestic workers, which is important. I'll just give you some quick pointers there, which strives at including domestic workers in existing legislations and their right to register in the state labor department. All right, and also their right to form associations, etc. And India, by the way, is a signatory to the International Labour Organization, ILO's 189th Convention, which is a convention on domestic workers. But India has not ratified yet. I'm not really sure of the reason for that, but they've not ratified the convention yet. But the ratifying states will be required to do something, to take some very proactive steps when it comes to ensuring minimum wages for the workers. And on 16 June 2011, the Domestic Workers Convention was adopted by the ILO in Geneva, and it recognized the significant contribution made by domestic workers in the overall global economy chain. And they looked at domestic workers as these invisible workers who are performing such valuable work, but completely unprotected and completely excluded from all kinds of protective umbrella. Um, I really didn't want to make this talk, a kind of heaving a sigh of despondency and, looking at the world as it is. The pandemic is upon us. Very little reason to celebrate. But one article which was very kindly sent to me by Professor Sen of Jindal, who I've had the occasion to work with on another project. This is of the National NHRC, the National Human Rights Commission, and this is as recent as of 5th October 2020. And I think this is really a very very proactive step, and I hope it goes in the right direction ultimately. This is a committee of experts on the impact of COVID on human rights and future response. This is a committee which did some study and made some surveys, and they actually wrote to the government to take some steps. And I will just briefly indicate what the points are and why I want to mention this as a kind of a bright spot in our discourse. The advisory of the human rights says that informal workers recognizes that informal workers are the worst hit because of the pandemic, and estimates that the reduction of working hours by mid 2020s is equivalent to 300 million full-time jobs, impacting working people in the informal sector, and most of all women workers and their dependents. And in India, the periodic labor force survey of 2017-2018 is that 90% of labor belongs to the informal sector. That's our country, India. And ActionAid has done some very good work, very important surveys in this area. ActionAid found that in 11,500 informal workers, 78% lost their jobs. due to the pandemic. And what they were, I mean, they were doing 40 hours a week before March 2020, which now is 0 hours per week for the 78% who lost their jobs. And one interesting paradox I just wanted to share with you is that the brunt of the pandemic was actually felt by the urban areas, the cities in India, whereas the rural areas were found to be comparatively, however marginally, better off. And what is the reason for that? Because they found that schemes, the rural job schemes such as Manrega, etc., those continued to function despite the pandemic, and the population of from the rural sector had shifted to the cities. Of course, the pandemic, we saw a reverse movement from the destination to the source, that is, the cities to the villages. But now the future projection is that if this continues, that is the destination to the source migration, then the rural infrastructure may suffer now, and it may there may be a resulting weight on the rural infrastructure to continue to support women. And the advisory actually says that generating employment and supporting women uh, workers' rights in general, and countering discrimination and exclusion in the workplace, then protection from violence and curbing fundamental rights, reducing care burden for women. That is, women. The reality is that uh, both men and women have been equally affected by the pandemic. But when it comes to women, I would love to have said otherwise. But the truth remains that women are expected to also pick up the slack, when it comes to household work, looking after aged parents, looking after children, looking after the domestic chores. That somehow invariably goes to the women. Of course, there are exceptions. I would love to recognize those exceptions, and I have seen exceptions. Uh, in fact, in my family, in my immediate extended family, in my friends, but not too many, sadly. And for the important part of the advisory of 5th October 2020 is that sex workers for the first time have been brought within the fold of the NHRC advisory, and they have been clubbed together with domestic workers. So sex workers have also been advised that their rights and entitlements should be available, as all rights and entitlements to general workers should also be made available to sex workers. And importantly, that there should be 1 year support plans for sex workers who would be unable to work even after the lockdown is over. Extremely important. So, and the advisory also brings within its fold single women workers, which is another important step forward. So, that part of my talk is over. Now I'll quickly go to the um, cultural icons. That's our all our icon Justice Ginsburg, and followed by Justice Seth. So Justice Ginsburg is, of course, no story of hers can be complete without her background. Ukrainian immigrant father, a mother who worked as a bookkeeper in New York's garment factory district, and belonging to the Jewish minority religious community. And Justice Ginsburg, facts which I'm sure most of you know, but a quick repetition because such inspiring facts. Justice Ginsburg was one of the 9 women in a class of 500 at Harvard Law School. And she actually could not manage to be hired by any of the major law firms after she graduated, which forced her to take up a teaching job at Rutgers University. And then, of course, she was in 1993 she was appointed to the Supreme Court by Bill Clinton, the president then, and before that she was a judge of the federal court. And the important thing to remember about Justice Ginsburg is that she fought for rights across the board. It will be doing great injustice to her if you club her with only women's rights. Of course, that is what she's known as, and she's become you know someone to look up to for that, and she's become a symbol, so to speak. But in, for example, 1975, Weinberger versus Wiesenfeld, she fought for gender discrimination cases which were also discriminatory against men. And in case, the law, she fought against the law which gave social security only to widows and not to widowers. And she also fought against laws for women, but she recognized that women must be given their place so as to be able to participate more fully in the workforce, rather than be encouraged to create a niche corner, kind of a specialized corner for themselves. So she was very aware of this angle. And as you know, affirmative action, which actually yes, just 1 minute. I'll just this whole concept of affirmative action, which actually started in the US. I think it was President John F. Kennedy's time, 1961. 1961. There was a committee on equal employment opportunity, which President Kennedy created, and that was designed to achieve non-discrimination in with regard to color and race in the US. And Justice Ginsburg was very aware of this, that the whole paradox of affirmative action, that when you take race or color out of the equation to promote equality, what you realize is that it's probably better to put in race and color back into the equation to secure those rights for the marginalized or for the socially disadvantaged. So that is a paradox which Justice Ginsburg in very many cases and fought for. And any discussion on Justice Ginsburg is not complete without some of her quotes, and I love them. Quote number one: women belong in all places where decisions are being made. Clap, clap. Then I ask no favor for my sex. All I ask of our brethren is that they take their feet off our necks. Next. Then I remember I read somewhere that Olof Palme, he was the Prime Minister of Sweden, who was, remember, he was gunned down. I think he was coming back from a movie uh, way back. Apparently, Justice Ginsburg worked with Olof Palme for a while, and Olof Palme told Justice Ginsburg that you're never going to liberate women from their roles at home if you don't liberate men to assume responsibilities at home. Happy words that. And of course, the famous you can't spell truth without root. Um, I really admire Justice Ginsburg for hundreds of reasons, including her friendship with Justice Kalia. Despite representing divergent views and so many other on so many other aspects. But most of all, is because Justice Ginsburg kind of subverted all the feminine tropes which we are acquainted with of a cultural icon. She was she made no bones about dressing in a certain way. Her neck pieces, her collar pieces became stuff of myth, and she was diminutive. And every cliche she kind of turned on its head. The way she spoke, her sense of humor. I remember that it was doing its rounds on WhatsApp, that that I always listen to my mother-in-law as to how to make a marriage successful. That is to become temporarily deaf sometimes. And I have found that it has worked not only in my married life, but also when it comes to my colleagues. So that's where her humor came from. And the way she carried herself, her push-ups, her gym activity, her levels of physical fitness, her love for the opera, everything, it kind of makes her into a kind of person who would inspire generations. So next, Justice Seth, we come to Justice Leela Seth, we come to India. So she was appointed as the first lady judge of the Delhi High Court and the first Chief Justice of an Indian court. And Justice Seth embodies qualities and embodies thoughts and ideas which were so ahead of her times. I mean, if I can use the word ahead. And of course, she is, she has children who are extremely talented leaders in their own fields. I'm of course referring to Vikram Seth, Aradhana Seth, and Santam Seth, individual original thinkers. And Justice Seth, of course, she represented and she spoke. She was vocal about rights, not only women's rights, but of the LGBT community. And her very impassioned and her very touching letter to to I think it was the Times or some other journal, in the after the in the aftermath of Suresh Kaushal judgment. I think that was 2013, where I quote, I very touching. My son Vikram is now a criminal, an unapprehended felon. This is because, like millions of other Indians, he is gay. So very touching words, and I remember, I don't want to quote the entire thing. One paragraph, she talks about love being the pillar of of society, the importance of the liberty and the freedom of one man to love another. Extremely touching. And what she was known for, she, for example, she was part of the Burma Commission after the 2012 Delhi rape case, and she believed that death penalty should not be imposed for rape, because that will not deter serious crimes against women. And she also advocated that the punishment for causing death or any inducing a vegetative state should be rigorous imprisonment for no less than 20 years. So not the death penalty. And she also advocated daughters' rights, equal rights for daughters, and property rights for daughters under the Hindu Succession Act. And she was a firm believer in the concept that daughters should no longer be looked as limited owners of ancestral property. And she in a TED talk, I remember, she said that she observed that dowry was paid by the most progressive women, sadly, in our society, and we know that, don't we, all of us. And she spoke up for women's right to property, and I really think that this is interventionist. This was because even women of our I know women, my friends, my cousins, my family members, who are still not at all aware of what their rights to property are. And Justice Seth made that very important point, that when it comes to your brothers, you should not bow down. You should say that, look, I may be a sister, but this is my property right, and I have a right to my ancestral property. So she was very clear on that. Um, so what I was just thinking that when these two names were suggested to me, Justice Ginsburg and Justice Seth, what is it that makes a cultural icon? Of course, it can be a swagger, um, a dismissive wave of the hand, of all that is wrong with the world, affirmative action, a vow to take affirmative action, um, a commitment to collectivism. And I must make a point here that when we talk of women's rights, it's very important for all of us to remember, for you to remember, that women's rights cannot be seen in isolation as individual scripts, individual success stories. It has to be seen in the larger context, because the moment you look at individual success stories, you will be trapped in, in that conundrum, and you will come up and say, oh, there's no glass ceiling. Women are not discriminated against, and I have never had any bad experience, and I have been extremely lucky to have very liberal employers, to have very liberal colleagues. But yes, you may be lucky, you may be blessed in that way, but it is very important for us to remember. If it is a kind of a fist thumping, fist punching way, that you have to have that commitment, no matter how privileged you are, to look down and to hold the hands of women who are in the lower rungs of that ladder of success, of entitlement, and to give them a helping hand, literally, and to bring them up in whatever way is possible. And when we talk of Justice Ginsburg and Justice Seth, I can immediately think of at least 10 women leaders, and at least two, one woman judge who I know very personally, who have an equal commitment to the cause. And the first step towards that direction is to be aware. um, I cannot stress the importance of being financially independent, because that is what will buy you, literally buy you freedom to do whatever you want, and will also give you that choice. A choice to me is the most important definitive term, which can really show you that path, show you that direction, that you can exercise that choice when it comes to the crunch, or even when there's no crunch in your day affair. The awareness that you have a choice, and that you have the right and the freedom to exercise it. I think that's the most important right we need to be aware of. And the last segment is, of course, the representation of women in the judiciary. Um, as of now, there are, I'm told, about 78 judges, lady judges in the high courts, and two lady judges in the Supreme Court. It is um, it is uh, you know i mean you you will you can all see that the representation is not enough. But the reality is that when you look at the upward movement to position as judges, in the high court at least, you are looking at a pool of women practitioners, either from the bar or from the district courts. I hate using the word lower, from the next level of the judiciary. So, obviously, if the pool has that many less number of women who can be considered to take up the position, then naturally the proportion of men to women will be completely skewed. That is the reality. How do we rectify that? First and foremost, the representation of women has to increase in the bar. When I say has to, it is of course a matter of choice. Now, I think most women, they prefer to go to the law firms, or they prefer other forms. And litigation probably is not a very popular choice. I hope it becomes at some point of time. But as more and more gravitate to the bar, and as more and more give their judicial services examination, the judicial examinations, when they either the direct recruits or the other exam, which by which they enter as judges in the civil courts below the High Court, the pool of women will increase. But having said that, it is also true that the women are more often than not subjected to the male gaze, So when it comes to briefing a particular woman, lady advocate for a matter, until and unless you have acquired an expertise in a particular subject, whichever that happens to be, and your name is a top of mind phenomenon, that if, for that matter, before a man's name comes, you are thought of first, or at least you are the second or third choice. The briefing women in matters and will not happen. And if that does not happen, women's opportunities of earning become restricted. And if that becomes restricted, then a woman's earning compared to a man's earning becomes compromised. And why I'm focusing on this is, as you may all be knowing, that when a particular name is being considered for judgeship in the High Court, at least, the income criterion is always looked at. So your income has to be commensurate to your volume of work. It has to be commensurate to the kind of work you do, and there has to be a favorable comparison between a lady advocate's earnings compared to a male advocate's earnings. And how will that happen until and unless more and more women are briefed in a larger volume of matters, or at least in matters where payment is assured, payment is regular, payment is high, so that they are naturally considered for judgeship. And apart from earnings, the reported cases, reported decisions, so all of that, I mean, if you don't have enough work, how do you get included in any of these categories? So that is an area which really needs to be worked on. I'm not sure how I can really bring about this change, except for informally, persuading certain people to brief more women. And for that, I don't have enough opportunity of doing something like that. But if all of you can see to that, and if all of you can add to that, I think that would be a great thing. And when it comes to the Supreme Court, of course, they always look for, the collegium. It always looks for a representative judiciary, not only in terms of gender, but also in terms of other classes. And I am absolutely sure that they are very positively they are positively inclined to include more women, because they want to make it a representative judiciary. As a last word, I just feel that a judiciary is as successful as the community it serves, as the community it represents. So therefore, a larger, more women judges will bring about their particular skill sets to the bench, their particular sensitivities. I firmly believe that there are certain matters where women are, I wouldn't like to really draw a comparison, but women have an inherent edge over men in conceptualizing certain problem areas. I'm not saying that men are totally excluded from that. I personally know of several men who are as sensitive, as sensitized as women, but more and more men should also be included in that bunch. So thank you very much. I have taken goodness, it's more than an hour. Sorry about that. I think I had promised to not to address more than half an hour, 40 minutes, but issue close to my heart, um, an audience I'm connected to, at least some members of it. I was very happy to talk about this topic, and I'll just leave you with an interesting thought, two thoughts actually, and I'll end with that. when I was thinking about the effects of the pandemic, it's been a leveler in a sense, if you know what I mean. You cannot really say that the pandemic has hit women and not men. Certainly not. It's been a leveler. Uh, Probably not. Probably, I'm sure many more men have lost their jobs. Many more men have got a pay cut. Many more men are in dire straits compared to the number of women. But the fact remains that women are at the receiving end when it comes to managing a whole lot of other issues apart from pay cuts, apart from job losses. And number two is that when I was talking to a friend. When you hear the word gender, and when you hear of the word women workers, okay, the first thing which comes to your mind is discrimination, is inequality. The positive thing about this is that the moment you recognize that there is discrimination, there is inequality, there is a difference in the level playing field, you also automatically realize that there is room for correction. So I would really like to end my talk not with a bow my head in shame and in despondency and in depression, but with a bright future that there is light at the end of the tunnel. We're probably surrounded by light already, and let's all get to that light and feed that light and ensure that we create that light around. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Justice Bhattacharya, for the insightful and informative talk, for bringing to fore the invisible workers in the context of working women, for engaging with the realities of women workers in sectors such as the hospitality, the industry, domestic workers, and sex workers, for highlighting the butterfly effect of the pandemic that moved beyond geographies, with women being laid off on a large scale, particularly the migrant workers, even before the pandemic reached their shores. In the context of access to justice, the data that you shared was eye-opening, with the realization that in some states, the population of female filing a case is as low as 1.8%, and that over the last one decade, there was hardly over 1% jump in the number of women who are actually practicing in the courts across the country. It was also quite inspiring to hear you speak about Justice Ginsburg and Justice Said, the stories of their struggle, success, and the inspiring journeys and valuable contributions that they have made. And towards the end of the talk, making a progressive suggestion on thoughtful and hopeful note that perhaps the way out is to enhance the representation of women at the bar, and the need for having larger volumes of women present across sectors, across levels, so that their presence gets counted. Thank you so much again. And now we would quickly proceed to the Q&A session. We have a number of questions, but owing to the paucity of time, we'll perhaps take take a couple of them. So now one of the questions that has been posed here is, while the pandemic has magnified all existing inequalities, has it affected the sense of equality among dual earner or dual earning couples? With normal life being suspended, has the end bargain among dual earner couples to divide the extra unpaid labor being tilted towards putting the burden solely on women, by enforcing the patriarchal structure?
Professor Nair, I think there was some sound disturbance. Can you just repeat the last part of the? I heard the dual
Right.
earning couple, and then
Right. So,
yes.
so the question is that the pandemic has further increased the burden of caregiving, because that is also that is also on women, and and they're also working, so therefore double burden. So this has reinforced the patriarchal authority or structure in the society.
Yes, of course. One of the points which I made is that you know women have been really women have borne the brunt of the pandemic on two levels. One is that they have lost their jobs, or even if they have not been working or at a regular salary or whatever, if their husbands have lost their jobs, apart from looking for an alternative employment, they have also been forced to kind of go indoors, so to speak, and manage their families. And so it's obviously a double burden that apart from ensuring income, ensuring a steady flow of money in the family, they also have to maintain the family and the normal functions of the family, and there's no sharing of chores there, I suppose, for most families. So yes, I hope I understood the question correctly. Was that the question, Professor Nair? Because
Right,
your
right,
voice is breaking. Yes.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that. Perhaps one last question, and this is about period leave. So the question is, a serious debate has sparked up around the concept of period leave. Considering the shift from office work to work from home, is period leave a feasible concept that employers can seek to implement, or does it disadvantage women further in terms of employment?
So period leave, I suppose, is what is kind of unpaid leave or paid leave.
So
What is period leave?
paid leave. I think this is in the context of menstrual leave, and the women who
Yes, yes.
apply for because of concern.
Oh, okay, very well. Yes, yes. Um, well, there has certainly been a shift, from office work to being at home and working. So I think, for my personal view, I am not really, because of the pandemic, I would not really support the view that any kind of structured leave should continue, because personally speaking, that would put women in a more disadvantaged position when it comes to job viability. And I think women now, uh, as it is, they have been struck by from April onwards. So I think they just need to be more present, more there, um, and to be more visible, so that at least they push themselves to becoming kind of indispensable in a certain way. So period leave in these times, personally speaking, I really would not advocate. And in fact, if I can just bring in a related thought, Justice Chandrachud in one of the webinars had actually made this point that the one of the good points about the pandemic has been the post push towards technology. And because of this technology and everything becoming now being case conducted on the virtual platform, that's of course only for litigant women and women lawyers are actually faring better, because they are now in a more in a space where they can manage their time better, and they can kind of not be having to kind of hang around in the courts whole day. So just to kind of link it with your answer, I just think that women, even though working from home gives you certain flexibility, but the pandemic really should make women more visible and more present, and not take leave at all until unless for serious health grounds.
Thank you. Thank you, Justice Bhattacharya, for joining us and sharing your knowledge and insight on the impact of pandemic on women workers across sectors and profession and access to justice. And thank you for answering our questions and engaging with the members of the audience. I now invite student coordinator and core committee member of Gender Studies Group, Ms. Sonal Kanwar Chauhan, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Professor Nair. As we come to the end of today's talk and interactive session, I would like to take a moment to thank everyone who made this possible. Ma'am Justice Moshami Bhattacharya, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and agreeing to address us all today. I speak for everyone when I say that this was extremely illuminating and very thought provoking. Professor Nisha Nair, thank you for your encouragement and help with every step of the process, without which this wouldn't have been possible. I would also like to extend a vote of thanks to the core committee of the Gender Studies group and the members of the IT support team at JGU for their cooperation, and a special thanks to the members of the audience for their active engagement, of course. We hope you enjoyed this session as much as we enjoyed organizing it. With this, the session is now concluded. Thank you all, and may you all have a good evening.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it, and wonderful group. Thanks very much, and a very good evening and a night to all of you. Enjoy the festive season. Be safe.